It's the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 83, and this is your host, Chris Blanchard. Jim Gerritsen of Wood Prairie Family Farm in Aroostook County, Maine, is not just a potato farmer. He's a potato artist. Wood Prairie Farm provides certified organic seed potatoes and other products to customers around the country through their mail order catalog. Certified organic since 1982, Wood Prairie Family Farm has 40 acres in production with 10 or 12 of those in seed potatoes each year. After an orientation to the history of Wood Prairie Farm and the potato culture of Aroostook County, we dig into the whys and the hows of growing a great crop of potatoes, from seed warming and green sprouting through weed control all the way to harvest. We also discuss the ins and the outs of producing Maine-certified potato seed. Jim is an observant and specific farmer and marketer and really brings out the details of what goes into bumper yields and high-quality spuds. We don't get into everything else that Jim does, but I think it's worth mentioning here. Jim was named by the editors of the Etne Reader to that magazine's 2011 list of 25 people who are changing the world. Jim is also one of those organic farmers who spends a huge amount of his time serving the community. Jim is the president of the Organic Seed Growers and Trade Association. He served for more than 20 years on the Maine Organic Farmers and Garden Association Certification Committee, and he has about a dozen other roles that he's played in the organic farming movement. I first met Jim when I was farming in Maine. He used to pick me up on his way down to board meetings for the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardens Association so that he could go down specifically to show up and make sure that they were doing the right thing when it came to working with GMOs back in the late 1990s. Potatoes were my first vegetable love, and they still hold a special place in my heart. That may have influenced my decision not to cut and slash this episode too much. While it's the longest episode of the Farmer to Farmer podcast to date, I'm confident that it's got a ton of value right to the end. Enjoy. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is made possible with the generous support of Vermont Compost Company, founded by organic crop growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high quality compost and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production. VermontCompost.com. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is also brought to you by your support. Whether you're donating to the show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate, shopping at Amazon through the link at farmertofarmerpodcast.com/Amazon, or showing us your love by leaving us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, your support makes a difference. Thank you. Jim Gerritsen, welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast.
Hi, Chris. It's good to be here.
So glad you could join us today. I'd like to start off today by having you tell us a little bit in your own words about Wood Prairie Family Farm.
Okay. Well, we started up Wood Prairie Family Farm, which is located in northern Maine in Aroostook County. We started it back up in the mid-'70s, so we've been farming organically for 40 years. We've been certified organic by MOFGA since 1982. Our farm is in total 115 acres. We own 110 acres and rent one field, a 5-acre field, from neighbors. And as is typical of farms in New England, about half of the land is in woods and half is in field. So we've got 56 acres of farmland, and of that, we cleared the trees off of 38 acres. In most cases, they were trees that had grown back anywhere from 30 to 70 years since the old-timers had originally cleared the fields. And the fields were originally cleared about 100 years ago, right before World War I. So of the 56 acres that we've got as farmland, 48 acres of that is rotated cropland, and the balance 8 acres is in buildings and pasture. And the 48 acres of rotated farmland, we have a 4-year rotation. Our main crop is organic Maine-certified seed potatoes, so that allows us to grow 10 or 12 acres of seed potatoes a year. And then in rotation, we also grow spring grain, usually wheat, sometimes oat, sometimes winter rye. And then we have a hay crop mix of grass and clovers. And then the year prior to going back into potatoes, we have plow-down crops of buckwheat and rapeseed as a biofumigant. And then in the 5th year, we're back to potatoes.
And those seed potatoes, that's really the cornerstone of your operation.
Yes, it is. There's an old saying in Aroostook County that you can't make any money on any crop besides potatoes. And there's in many ways, it's a little bit of a truism. Aroostook County has been growing potatoes. The first European settlers came in. There were some French that came up, Acadian French, in the late 1700s. The English started coming in 1807. In our town, the first English came in from central Maine in 1827. And pretty quick, they cleared the trees off. All the land up here was forested. There wasn't anything clear to speak of. So at one time, there were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres that had the trees cleared off, mostly in the 1800s. And once the railroads came in the 1880s and 1890s, that opened up the market. So they shifted away from manufacturing starch, which was kind of a way, like turning corn into moonshine. It was a way of adding value and condensing that crop into a valuable crop that could be more easily shipped. So they did that with starch. There was a big demand for starch because of starch clothing. But once the railroads came in, that allowed Maine potatoes to be exported as table stock or eating potatoes down the East Coast in rail cars, and that really catapulted Maine's production ahead, so that it dominated for many decades last century as the number one potato producing state, and that peaked in the early 1950s at 237,000 acres of potatoes. And then since then, as everybody knows, the production has shifted to the west, Idaho, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, states like that.
That industry was in doing potatoes for what they call table stock, right? For eating potatoes.
Yes, that's right.
But you guys don't really do eating potatoes.
Well, it's true. A certain portion of any northern tier state that's growing potatoes is going to grow seed. And Maine gained a reputation for very high quality seed that the market really wanted. I think it was Wisconsin that developed the first state seed certification program in 1914, so just over 100 years ago. And I think Maine came up with their system 1 or 2 years later. So there's been this Maine-certified seed system in place for 100 years, and I think the system that we have in Maine is probably at least as good as anybody else's system. So then you combine a good seed certification system with fairly steady, equally distributed rain and cool nights and warm days, which is what potatoes love, plus the great extent of well-drained caribou silt loam that we have in northern Maine. And you have what became known as the potato empire, and Maine was dominant in the potato market, primarily for table stock, but secondarily for seed. And the seed customers would be anybody south of us, to where there would be enough insect activity that might vector and spread virus that it would pay for somebody at a further south in latitude to buy new seed every spring, because they would end up getting a better yield from northern grown seed. What does the seed certification process consist of? Well, it's run by the state of Maine, Department of Agriculture, and in the springtime after you get done planting, you fill out a form and you enter the seed that you want certified, and then you have state seed inspectors that come out and check our crop for freedom from disease 3 times during the growing season. And once you get done harvest, you fill out a digging report indicating how many hundredweight of every variety you harvested. And then you also submit a 400 tuber sample to the state. That state of Maine owns a farm in Homestead, Florida, down by the Everglades. And they take that sample, like we'll send down about 40 bags. And 400 tubers is about a 50-pound bag. So we send down about 40 samples, which are then placed in a grow-out test at the state of Maine farm in Homestead, Florida. And then beginning about Christmas time, the inspectors from up here in Maine, they go down and spend 2 or 3 weeks in Florida, not on vacation, but on working in the hot sun, doing what are called the Florida readings. So they're reading for virus, and that becomes a pass-fail test. If you pass the test, then you are allowed to put blue Maine-certified seed tags on the bags of seed that you're sending. And even if your readings were good during the summer, but if you got late season aphid flight that could have spread virus, if you have too high of a disease, meaning over 5% in Florida, you flunk and you can't sell it as Maine-certified seed. So it's a rigorous system, it's a good system, and you do have to start with recognized varieties. You got to start with something that is recognizable by the seed certification people.
Which must be an interesting process for you guys, because your varieties are not your run-of-the-mill varieties.
While that's true, we've been fortunate that the state of Maine seed certification people, after initial skepticism 30 years ago, they very quickly came around. There were some good people that were running the program back in those days, and while they may have been skeptical that an organic grower could meet their requirements, you had to hand it to them. At least they were open-minded and let us prove ourselves. And now, 30 years later, we continue to get good disease readings and sell high-quality seed that, in fact, North Dakota State University did a 3-year trial back in the last decade, comparing different varieties of organic seed from different sources around the country, and consistently our seed came out on top in terms of overall yield and number one pack out. So bottom line is we're really advantaged by being in Maine. We've got everything going for us, and we're able to produce some of the highest quality seed potatoes in the United States, and our customers are loyal because of that.
How did you guys get into doing seed potato production? Doing specialty seed potato production would not be the first thing I would think that would come to mind to somebody back in the early 1980s trying to start an organic farm.
Yeah, well, and it didn't. For 10 years in the 1980s, we sold at local farmers markets. We had 3 farmers markets, and we sold there for 10 years. And then in 1990, we started up the second CSA project in the state of Maine, and we ran that for 4 years. And, what we faced with both of those enterprises was the fact that there just aren't any people up here. Aroostook County, Maine is the largest county east of the Mississippi. In terms of land area, it's larger than the states of Connecticut and Rhode Island combined. It is the most sparsely populated county east of the Mississippi River. In our county, we have 70,000 people. And it's a challenge because there aren't that many people here. There's a lot of people that still keep gardens. So it's not, this would be the opposite end of being in a place like Portland, Maine, or Boston, or Philadelphia, or Washington, D.C., where you have, a high demand, not many people that raise their own gardens. So I guess it required us to kind of do out-of-the-box thinking as to how can we make a living growing organic crops. So trying to sell potatoes in Aroostook County is every bit as easy as selling coal in Newcastle. And it only dawned on us at some point that mail order was a way that we could get our product and get retail dollar just as we had gotten used to with the farmers market sales and the CSA sales, and really not be restricted in where we sent the product. So we came up with that as an idea almost 30 years ago, and started in, and I guess the proof's in the pudding. I think we benefited and maybe helped to create kind of this renaissance of specialty potatoes that was occurring in the late 80s and 1990s. And probably a lot of your listeners are growing specialty varieties of potatoes and selling them at the farmers markets or at their farm stands. And there was a time, you go back to the 1970s, and there were no golden or yellow-fleshed varieties. There were no purple varieties that were being grown. So as the interest in different varieties came up, those of us that saw a niche to be supplied, we benefited. So we continue to have customers in all 50 states, though the majority of them are east of the Mississippi River, but we have them all over, and I am grateful for, the California, Oregon, and Washington crowd that definitely wants potatoes and likes the variety, the selection of the varieties that we have.
So when you were getting into the business and those potatoes weren't really out in commerce, where did you go to source those original varieties?
Well, that was one good thing here in the state of Maine. The state of Maine has the Maine Seed Potato Board, and they have a propagation facility, a tissue culture propagation facility, isolated in the North Maine woods about 20 miles west of us in the town of Oxbow. And they had a really pretty remarkable collection, and then they were willing to work with us to bring in varieties from, Cornell and some from Wisconsin that they didn't have that we were interested in. And then I was able to deal with, good people like Chuck Brown, who's a USDA potato breeder in Washington State, and he provided access to rose-fin apple. I know we got that from him. I think we got two, maybe even three varieties from him. And so, one by one, we've built up, and we now grow about 24 varieties, but that includes about every year we're growing 4 varieties in our trials that we're continuing to look over to see if we're going to add them as a mainline variety. So we're offering about 20 varieties a year, and if we have enough, we offer some of these experimental varieties to our customers just so that they can get some experience with them to see if it's going to pan out for them. One of the varieties that you grow is one that you guys actually discovered, right? Yeah, the variety Prairie Blush is one that my terminology is that we discovered it, and in the crop of 2001, I was grading a seed lot of Yukon Gold that we had grown, and I found a single tuber come across the grading line that had a pink blush covering, probably about a third, maybe half of the skin area. And it was extraordinary. It was very beautiful. So I set that potato aside, I put it in a bag, and I marked it and marked what lot it was out of. And then the next spring, we planted that out, and we put a flag around it to make sure we'd keep track of it. And when we harvested that hill that fall, every tuber in that hill had similar coloration of a pink blush that took up between a quarter and half of the skin area. So it's a bicolor potato, and from that point, we continued to grow it. I knew that we had something, and once we had enough tubers, we were able to eat some of them, and it really is one of the best tasting varieties that we've ever come upon. And we, at the same time, brought some up to the potato breeder at the Potato Experiment Farm in Presque Isle, and that was Dr. Zenaida Ganga, and she conducted some tests on this variety and documented that it had a specific gravity a little bit less than Yukon Gold. So specific gravity, if you'll recall, is where you compare the density of something to the density of water. So water is going to be 1.000, and potato density is going to be something like 1.067 up to 1.085 or 089. So the higher the specific gravity, the drier the potato is, and Yukon Gold is a pretty dry potato, and this Prairie Blush is several notches less on the specific gravity, which I think actually for some people the Yukon Gold is too dry of potato. And I guess in the fullness of time, I knew that we had a winner when, after a few years after we'd been offering this, one of our experienced market growers told me that she was giving up growing German butterball. And I don't know if you've tried it or if your listeners have, but German butterball is pretty much the most outstanding variety out there in terms of taste. So when she said she was giving up butterball, I asked her, well, what was the reason for that? And she said, well, we've been growing Prairie Blush, and the Prairie Blush tastes better, and it's a higher yielding variety, shorter season and higher yielding, so there's no point to growing the German butterball. So from that point onward, I knew that we had a winner, and in fact, we entered it in the well, back then it was the Mail Order Gardening Association. Now it's the Direct Gardening Association, into their Green Thumb Award. And we did win an award the year that we introduced this into the market. So it's been a very popular variety and is really great tasting and has a growth habit quite similar to Yukon Gold. It does have a higher set than Yukon Gold, which is good because that's one of the weaknesses of Yukon Gold. But it's about 5 days later than Yukon Gold, and it's a great variety that we were thrilled to have found and happy to put our name on it, Prairie Blush.
When you're growing seed potatoes, how does that process work? You must be starting with stock that's clean of virus, clean of disease. Where do you get that? And then what's the process of actually going through the seed potato production as opposed to just doing table stock? Is it just a matter of the inspection, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, all potatoes, even heirloom varieties, all potatoes nowadays are propagated through tissue culture. And the tissue culture is free of virus disease. And virus is what the old-timers, before they had microscopes, before they could figure out what was going on, they used to use the phrase running out, that a seed lot would have run out. And what it was a buildup of virus, and it's pretty remarkable, but you can get a buildup of virus within one generation, but more likely it's going to take a few generations. And then if you get a buildup of more than one type of virus, it can bog down the potato. And I got a call one time from a grower that he wasn't getting his seed from us, but he said he had planted 100 pounds of seed in the spring, and that fall went to harvest, and he harvested 100 pounds in the fall. And he had basically been planting his own seed for many years, and it clearly had loaded up with virus to the point where it wasn't productive. So I suggested that next year he could avoid planting potatoes and go fishing in the summer for all the good that he was going to get. But it's an indication that what farmers have seen is that virus is transmitted by aphids primarily. And if the further south you go in latitude, the more you have aphid activity and aphid spread. So nowadays, seed potatoes are grown by the states, the northern tier states from Maine across to Washington State. And Colorado also grows them in San Luis Valley because they're 8,500 feet elevation. So that elevation gives them, an equivalency to the latitude that we have up north. But the benefit is in the north you have cooler conditions in the summer, less insect activity, less vectoring, and the production of higher quality seed that's going to be lower in virus. So the origination facilities that the Maine Seed Potato Board has at their Porter Farm, they, through tissue culture, they grow out basically mini tubers, and we contract for the production of mini tubers, and then we plant those out in the field, and then we grow them for a couple of generations, multiply them up before we sell them to our customers. So when we're sending samples to Florida, very often we've got 3 generations of every variety. So what we're sending to Florida is often a couple of those generations that are going to be for sale. And then, the inspectors come and make sure that the tubers that are being shipped out are meeting grade for quality. And, we affix the certified seed tag to the bag, and the customers know that they've met the requirements of Maine system, which, like I've said before, it's a good system.
Then the actual process of growing potatoes, can you walk us through how you do that at Wood Prairie Farm and what it is that makes a difference for you guys in growing them? Because I assume you're really good at growing potatoes.
Well, when I first landed in here 40 years ago, I was 21 years old. Had spent all of the money that I had on the farm that I bought, 40 acres at $150 an acre, $6,000. And then I had to work, so I worked the first fall. I worked for Bradbury Brothers on their potato harvester, and then was working in local potato houses, which is what Maine calls their potato storages, and putting up seed and table stock. So basically, I've gained 40 years experience of working with and growing potatoes. So I guess once you gain through experience, the next spring I worked for another farmer in town helping him plant his potato and oat crop. And, so you gain experience first working for others and then second working for yourself. So much of what we do isn't that much different than any of your listeners that are raising potatoes. But, as you might imagine, there are some ways of doing growing seed, and a lot of what we've tried to do is learn how the old timers did things before they had things like insecticides. So now, in order to minimize aphids, farmers have sprayers with cabs in it and filtered units so they don't have to breathe in the spray, and they're spraying these really, really heavy-duty insecticides. Which, they do a pretty good job, but it takes, 3 seconds for some of the really powerful insecticides to kill the aphids, and they can transmit in the first second, so that aphid can spread can transmit that disease from a sick plant to a formerly healthy plant, but after that, it's dead. So anyway, to me, there's a need for a paradigm change, and I'm not saying that my conventional neighbors need to go back, but our way of doing it is to look at how they did things before they had insecticides. So the trick that we use is called tuber unit planting, and that allows you to take a mother tuber and then say you cut it into 4 seed pieces, and then we sequentially plant those 4 seed pieces right in order so that they're planted in the ground in order. So every tuber of the 25,000 pounds that we plant is divided into, it's cut on the back of the planter, and we have built, based on a design we saw of some old farmers that did it, we've got a 2-row tuber unit planter, which goes down the row at about half a mile per hour. And we've got 4 workers on back that are taking green sprouted potatoes from the potato hopper and placing them on a segmented conveyor belt sequentially so that they are tuber unit planted in the ground. So the benefit of this is we rogue our fields like the old timers did, removing the rogues or the plants that express virus. And if you have, as you're going through the field, you'll see maybe the first thing that might catch your eye is you've got 3 or 4 plants in a row that are 3 or 4 inches lower than the other plants in the row, and that would be an indication of virus. Then you look more closely at it, and you can see some striation or discoloration or deformity in the leaves, and you pick out the one plant that looks the worst, and then you look at the seed piece, and then our term is that you jigsaw puzzle the seed piece back together. So you start pulling plants out until you've got all of the original seed pieces that made up that mother tuber. So we take those plants out of the field and destroy them, and what that does is it prevents an aphid that blows in here from the south, that if it were to feed on one of those sick plants and then jump onto a healthy plant, as soon as it inserts its probe, it takes 1 second for it to transmit that virus. So that was where I was getting back to the paradigm failure of using insecticides, because an insecticide will not prevent it from spreading that. And there are some aphids actually that, that bring disease with them in their system as they blow in here. But the point is, if you can eliminate the inoculum, the virus inoculum in your field, then you have the greatest possibility of raising plants that are going to be free of virus. And it's required. I mean, the seed inspectors come out and they can spot the virus and you get scored against it. So we go through, in a normal year, we go through on a weekly basis for 4 or 5 weeks, roguing out any virus that's in the field. So it's fairly labor intensive, and nowadays with labor costs being what they are and not finding people that really want to, walk in hot fields. It's not commonly done. Some people do it every year. Other people will rogue their fields when they've got a problem that's been identified. But in every case but ours, I think we're the only one that is doing tuber unit planting anymore. If you've got a little runty plant, it's going to be shorter than the 2 neighbors next door that are going to shade it. So there's a much less likelihood of pulling out or of identifying and pulling out that plant than if you've got them tuber unit planted, because you can see 4 plants in a row that are starting to express virus is a lot easier to see than 4 random plants hiding out under the canopy of larger plants over them.
Somewhere in your acre field. Are you guys walking every row then?
Well, depending on, we can do a good job on 4 rows apiece if we think that, if there's more, if we've got a virus problem we're dealing with, we'll take 2 rows, and if it's a variety that we historically don't have much problem with, we can take 6 or 8 rows apiece. So, it's not a terrible thing, but on our 10 or 12 acres, we can do a really good job. If you're growing, 400, 500 acres, good luck.
Yeah. And how long does it take you to walk 10 or 12 acres of potatoes? How many man hours do you have into that?
Well, we'll start at 7 in the morning and work till noon. And we've got Megan, my wife, and I, we're the spotters. And we'll carry a can of red spray paint and have some orange diversion ditch flags, belt and suspendering it. So we'll identify a plant in the unit and we'll spray it, and then we'll put in a flag. And then we've got one of our kids driving the tractor, pulling the roguing cart, which is a high clearance cart that the diggers follow behind, and they'll pull up the flag and they'll pull up the plant, and then they dig into the hill and remove any tubers that might have developed, and we have them for dinner. And then they put the plants on the roguing cart and we take them out. So there's going to be 5 of it. We have 5 of us going through, and we can do the 10-acre field, one morning a week, 5 hours for 5 people.
At what stage of growth are you doing this roguing process?
Yeah, the potatoes have to be mature enough in order to express virus. So, it depends on the variety. Some varieties like Onaway, which is a short season round white, just, one of the qualities of that variety is it doesn't break with virus until fairly late. But you can usually see it in most varieties, when the plants are getting up to about a foot tall. So we start in as soon as they're big enough to express.
Once you plant the potatoes with your belt planter, then what's next?
Well, let me back up, because there's one important step before we plant. A month before our expected planting date, we green sprout our seed, and we plant about 25,000 pounds, and virtually all of that we green sprout. And green sprouting or chitting is a European technique. It's an optional technique, but I think it's one that is really extremely valuable for anybody growing potatoes organically. What it does, what it amounts to is, there's 2 important steps to it. the first week in darkness, you break the potatoes out of dormancy at about 70 to 75 degrees. And then once the potatoes have broken dormancy, and the way you determine that is as soon as you see any kind of growth coming out of the eye, that means they've broken dormancy. So at that point, you drop the temperature back to 50 or 55 degrees, and you expose the potatoes to light. So we've got 700 or 800 wooden green sprouting trays that we have built. And we've got the plans for them on our website, but we bought 20 or 30 of them from the potato farm, the experiment farm up here, that had an English guy work for him 1 year, and he convinced them how great green sprouting was, and they used them 1 year, and they never used them again because it is a fair amount of extra labor. And the agriculture practice in the USA is extensive agriculture. The agriculture practiced in Europe historically has been intensive, and I think the organic growers, ourselves included, are very much intensive producers. So green sprouting is really good for intensive producers. The benefit of this is that by starting 4 weeks early and doing this preconditioning, you can knock 10 to 14 days off the growth cycle in the field. So the benefits of this are, one, if you're selling at a farmer's market, you can get potatoes 10 to 14 days before your competition, which that's a real advantage. In our case, it allows us to grow some long season varieties that otherwise we would have a hard time fitting into our short growing season in northern Maine. But I think the one thing that would benefit every organic grower is that it shortens the growing window. It basically cuts down by 10 or 14 days the opportunity for something to go wrong with your potatoes. And if you look at August, which end of August is when we start killing our potatoes, you can have Colorado potato beetle, you can have leafhopper, you can have aphids that have come in, you can have late blight pressure, rarely early blight pressure. You can have drought, you can have excessive rain. In other words, that 10 to 14 days of advantage when you were warming and maturing that crop in your garage where it's completely safe, it really pays for itself in August, because you can get the yield that you're after by not having to make them go through what seems like an eternity, but it's only 14 more days in late summer, early fall.
When you talk about exposing these to light, how much light are you exposing them to? You said in your garage, so it's not like you've got these out in your greenhouse like I would for growing a tomato plant.
Yeah, no, we've had people that have put them in their greenhouse, and that's violating the second rule. And the second rule is to drop the temperature down to 50 to 55 degrees. The greenhouse is going to be that time of year, 85 or something like that. And here's the reason that you want to drop the temperature. You want to cut down the respiration rate of that potato. And handling the potato is all important. I think that's one of the reasons that Maine can provide such high quality tubers, is because in the fall after harvest, we, like every potato grower everywhere, we suberize our crop for about 10 days, high humidity, 50 to 55 degrees after the crop has been harvested. By that time, it's around the 20th of October, and once the suberization process is done, which is wound healing, it allows the skin on the potato to heal itself over any cuts or damages that might have occurred with harvest. So once that process is done, we open the doors in the underground potato storage on any night where it's colder outside than it is in the storage, and we run fans and a humidifier all night long, bringing in cold air. That allows us to drop our crop from, field temperature 55, 58 degrees down to about 40 degrees by about the 5th or 8th of November. And then we let it drop down to 38 and store the crop at 38 degrees. By cooling them down so quickly, that arrests the physiological aging of the tubers. And what you're trying to do is have youthful tubers that are full of vigor, because that vigor translates to higher yield in the next generation. So that's another benefit of growing seed potatoes in the cool north is physiological aging can be looked upon as a measure of stress. So in a hotter summer, we're going to have the tubers that we harvest in the fall are going to be physiologically older than they would have been in another year where the temperatures were cooler. So in that way, if we had a hot summer, we're going to want to cool them down that much more quickly to try to arrest that. And this is part of, the value and the benefit of Maine potatoes is because we cool down so quickly in the fall. And further south of us, where they have warmer falls, they can't cool down the potatoes as quickly. And what they have to plant in the spring would not have as much vigor and it would not perform as well. So the 50 to 55 degree step number 2 in green sprouting is a continuation of this management technique of maintaining vigor in the seed piece. So you would not, even though you would have great light conditions in a greenhouse, it is absolutely too warm in there. Now, one way you could do benefit from the greenhouses, if you didn't have time to benefit from a full green sprouting procedure, I would definitely, even 3 days at warm temperature is going to benefit. There was an informal test done by one of the, the guy that ran the Porter Farm up here 25 or 30 years ago, and he planted about half of a truckload of seed on a Friday, and then they were government workers, so they didn't work on the weekend. So back on Monday, they were back to work. So over the weekend, they parked that truck in a garage, and they turned up the heat to 75 degrees, and then they planted that next half of that seed lot on Monday, and they got a 10 to 15% yield from those tubers that they planted on Monday compared to the Friday, just simply by warming that seed up for the 3 days. So that would be something I definitely recommend. It may be too involved for many farmers to go through a full green sprouting regime in the spring because everybody's busy in the spring, but just doing that of laying out your tubers so the warmth can get at them, to warming them up. One benefit of warming them up at a high temperature, say 70, 75, even 80 degrees, is that you are suppressing the apical dominance in that tuber. The apical, or the seed end, is the end opposite the stem, and that's where there tends to be a concentration of eyes. And when potatoes sprout in cold conditions, say 42, 43 degrees, the apical end is dominant, and you're going to get a king sprout, and that king sprout suppresses the secondary sprouts. Well, what we're after, particularly as seed growers, is we want every eye on that tuber to sprout. So by sprouting at 75 degrees, you're suppressing apical dominance. You're encouraging the secondary sprouts to form. And the reason that's valuable, and I believe it's valuable for everybody, whether you're raising table stock or whether you're raising seed, but it's this: the number of tubers, which is called the tuber set. The number of tubers is a function of how many stems you've got per acre or per 100 feet. So if you're warming at 75 degrees, you're going to get more uniform sprouting. That's going to give you more stems per acre. That's going to give you more set per acre. And if you have a good set, that is laying the foundations for the highest possible marketable yield that you can get. If you end up planting cold seed that was sprouted at 40 or 43 degrees, you're typically going to get one or two tubers that go oversized, and then you're going to get some little peewees that go along with that. You look at that tuber, and its response to its biological command is simply to reproduce itself. It just needs to produce one or two tubers, and then it's got its mandate. Farmers, on the other hand, we're trying to manipulate that plant to grow as many tubers as reasonably it can. So if you can get, 6 or 8 tubers under that plant and get them all to size up to a marketable weight, you're going to have a much more marketable crop, and you're going to make a lot more money than if you sprout them cold. So that's I think what the benefit was of the Porter Farm story of them warming up that half of a truckload for 3 days. I think that helped with getting those secondary sprouts to come out and gave them a better yield.
And it seems that if they were doing that with half a truckload, the light's not so important. So if I want to warm my seed before planting it, I could just take, bags of seed and pull them out into my relatively warm packing shed and just leave them for 3 or 4 days out there before we put them out in the field.
Yeah, just so long as the center of the bag, the tubers at the center of the bag warm up. It's kind of like baking a turkey. The outside is going to be done a lot quicker than the inside. So that's why I'm saying, maybe spread it out in tulip boxes or in bread trays or whatever you have, or right on the floor if that was it. But here's the reason that you do the light. The light greens up the tubers, and it prevents the sprouts from elongating and thereby breaking off. So in the absence of light, we've all had potatoes get away from us in the cellar in the dark, and those sprouts are going to grow 6-inch, 12-inch, 2-foot long, and that is because the sprout is searching for light. Well, that is not what you want in the seed that you're going to plant. Most likely, once the sprout gets beyond 4 inches, it's most likely going to just kind of turn black and die off. Sometimes it'll turn green and grow, but usually it'll die off, and then a new sprout's going to come from the base. But you wasted all of that energy from that tuber, and it's definitely going to have an impact on your yield. So the reason after you, step one, you warm the seed up for a week at 70 to 75 degrees, then you drop the temperature to 50 to 55 degrees, and you expose the tubers to light. That light will green up the tuber, and it will green up the stem, and it will prevent the stem from elongating. So when well executed, you're going to have a sprout that is about it depends on the variety, but for most varieties, it would be about 5/8 of an inch or 3/4 across, and maybe 5/8 of an inch or 3/4 tall. And if it's getting longer than that, it means that either you don't have sufficient light, so you got to increase the light, or you got to cut back the temperature because you've got so much vigor in the seed that it wants to grow. So, there are ways of manipulating that. It would be possible that if you got an early generation seed lot of extremely vigorous seed, you might need to cut that back to, even 48, 45 degrees, even less. But usually more light is better. And I know there was one farmer we bought a tractor from 20 years ago, and he used to, it was a kind of a challenge for him to always have potatoes by the 4th of July up here. One of the traditional meals is salmon, peas, and new potatoes. So he would have everybody in town save their half-gallon milk cartons, and he would fill that with potato soil, and then he would, he didn't know it was called green sprouting, but he would warm up a tuber and he would stick that potato into the milk carton full of potato soil, and then he had a flatbed truck that would be, 8 foot wide and probably 22 feet long, and he would have that entire bed covered with half-gallon milk cartons, and then in the daytime, he'd back out into the drive and let the light get at it, and then in the evening, when it would be, in April and early May, it's below freezing most nights up here, he'd just drive that truck in and close the garage door. So it was a great system. And then when he planted those out, he always had the earliest potatoes because of how he was doing it.
Where are you guys doing your green sprouting?
Well, we've got a shed that we built. It's a 24 by 48 foot shed, and we transfer the tubers up. We've learned to we put green sprouting trays we palletize them, and we put 3 trays per 100 pounds. So the stacks are typically 8 or 10 high to get through the doorway, and then 3 stacks. So we might have 30 trays on a pallet, so it'd be 1,000 pounds of seed. And then we have these 1-inch ratchet straps that we hold the pallet from splaying out, and we take them up, we load them onto a hay wagon and drive them up the hill, and then unload them into there. So that works good. We'll turn the lights on, and once it's warmed up, then we open up the doors and let the natural light in. The light can be either sunlight or incandescent light or fluorescent light. It's nothing fancy, but like I say, if the sprouts are growing too long, it means you don't have enough light on them, so increase that light somehow.
So you do the week at the warm temperatures, and then you're going to cool things down, expose the potatoes to light for 3 weeks?
Yes. Yeah, our rule of thumb is a month before. Like in the old days when our springs used to be normal and predictable, we'd start green sprouting the middle of April, figuring that we'd be planting the middle of May. Now we've got, there was 1 year we didn't get on the ground until the last day of May. So this is not a high precision thing. So long as you have adequate light and you can control the temperature, they're not going to get away from you. And if you should, you start this, say if we were to start this in mid-April, and 1 year, about 4 years ago, we got our April weather in March, and then we got our March weather in April, but that meant we lost our snow. Usually we lose our snow the last week in April, and that year we lost our snow the last week in March. So the ground dried out, and we could get on the ground and plant by the end of April. So if you interrupt the green sprouting process, there's no problem whatsoever. You're not going to get the full 10 to 14 day advantage, but if the conditions change, you have nothing to lose. If it's the right time to plant potatoes, you want to go ahead and plant them and interrupt it. But that's the benefit of green sprouting, is there's a flexibility there. But we plan on it being a month ahead of time, but now especially you just never know what the spring is going to bring. But I would much rather have my potatoes on those pallets in our shed, safe from any snow or cold weather or something, and we can get some. It just seems like now our winters aren't they're not as strong or as bad as they used to be. The falls are warmer. It doesn't get cold as quick. But now it seems like the last part of winter seems to hang on, and our Aprils and Mays are typically much cooler. And we've got neighbors that are planting, they're using fungicide on the seed before they plant it, but they're planting seed typically in it's not uncommon that they'll plant when the soil temperature is 42, 43 degrees, and we would never do that as an organic grower. First off, the wound healing, like when you cut a tuber in half, that cut surface will not heal at a temperature below 45 degrees. So planting seed in the ground here in the east with the potential of getting, quite a bit of rainfall, is a risk that I'm just not willing to take. In our case, we like to let the soil temperature rise to 50 degrees, and that's taking the temperature at 4-inch depth between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes if we see a nice stretch of warm weather coming, we'll start in at 48 degrees, but we would never do it at 45 degrees. But that's become a pretty standard practice because our neighbors' farms have gotten so big that in order for them to get their crop planted in a timely fashion, they have to start early. And then more and more of them are now process growers growing a late variety like russet Burbank, and in order for their economics to work, they've got to get production bonuses from large tubers, which the French fry factory has a better recovery rate. There's less waste in a large tuber than a medium-sized tuber, so the farmers really need that, and they can only get it in our climate by planting what I think is pretty early, but so far I guess it's worked for them if you've got fungicide to put on the seed piece.
Right.
Now there are some guys, this is a story I still find it a bit hard to believe, but some of those guys out west in the Columbia River Basin in Oregon and Washington, apparently the attitude is, well, you got to store your seed somewhere, and they'll start planting on Washington's birthday, and they may go 8 weeks before they get emergence. And, okay, maybe you can do that out west where you don't get rain like we get in the east, but, planting tubers aren't going to come up for 8 weeks with the rain that we can get in the northeast. Let me put it this way. Nobody does that here in the northeast.
When you guys are putting your potatoes in the ground, because you're doing this tuber unit planting, you're cutting these potatoes right there on the potato planter.
3 seconds before they go in the ground.
So there's no curing process for them.
No.
Do you recommend that an average grower, if I was just growing a crop of table stock out here in Wisconsin, is that curing step necessary for me?
Well, one year we got some calcitic limestone, and we had a little bowl of it beside every worker, and we had them cut the tuber in half, then put the cut face into the lime, and then lay it on. And you can imagine how much that slowed down the process. And I didn't see any benefit. The idea, the double good that I wanted to get from it was as a desiccant, because what you want to do with healing is to dry out that cut surface to make it inhospitable for pathogenic fungus to come in and rot your seed piece. That's what rot's all about. So in our case, we've got a very well-drained soil that's on the point of being drouthy. And in our case, I don't think it's worth it at all. So if you have a very sandy soil, I think you can probably get away with it. If you're on the other end of the spectrum and you've got a clay-type soil and you're in an area where you can get, a fair amount of rain after planting, then you might want to either use calcitic limestone. The other benefit is calcium is the wonder mineral, and potatoes love calcium, and I figured that was giving them a boost of calcium could not hurt anything. So if I'm going to use a desiccant, I'm going to use calcium to try to achieve that. So, if you felt better by it, my normal way of experimenting is to do this. Okay, you got 2 rows of potatoes. Do one thing to one row one way, and do your other row the way you normally do, and then compare and write it down somewhere, because then in the fall you can't remember which row it was that you did which, and then compare and keep the number of variables down. But no farmer that I know has the time to do replicated plots. But if you can take, one thing that we spray onto the tubers to help increase tuber sect is a commercial product made by, I think it's called West Spray out in California, and it's called Organic Trigger. And they spell the trigger kind of cute. It's TRIGGRRR. But what it is, it's a proprietary formula. It's OMRI listed. But what I believe is in it, they've got cytokinins that they extracted from seaweed. So it helps to increase the tuber set. And my friend Fred Brossi in Idaho, who grows 30 or 40 acres of potatoes, he told me about this about 10 years ago and said that he was using it, and a lot of guys in the West were. So we tried it the first year. We grow more Yukon Gold than anything. We grow about an acre of Yukon Gold. So half the Yukon Gold we applied trigger to, and we would do this. The trigger, you got to apply it to a seed that is growing. You can't apply it to dormant seed. So once we green sprouted the tubers and broke dormancy, we'd run them over a roller table, and we set up a sprayer. So we would spray this trigger on top of them. And so half we did with trigger and half without. And when we were digging, I could not believe the difference, the improvement from the trigger. Back in those days, we used a 2-row John Deere digger, and I could see right from the seat of the tractor the difference. There was more tubers. They were more uniform. There were fewer small ones, fewer oversized ones. It really improved the quality of the crop. So the next year, I think we did 90% Yukon Gold with the trigger and 10% not. We got the same results. And then the year after that, we started to do it with every variety that didn't give us the set that we wanted, like Red Dale. Some of the varieties just don't give you the number of tubers per acre that you'd like to get. So we found that it worked great. Then the year after that, we started spraying it on everything, including the russets and the fingerlings. And we haven't looked back. So that was as an extensive a test as we found. But the cost per acre, I think I figured out, is only about $30 an acre. And we're getting back, say for 10 acres, we're getting back way, way, way more than $300. I hope West Spray is not listening, or they might raise the price on that product. But it's a good deal. And now, we work with Mark Fulford, who's an organic farmer here in Maine and a crops consultant, and he has given us some great insight into other materials that we're adding into that. And it varies every year, but when you're spraying one thing, it's easy to just spray several things more. So we're putting on some hydrolyzed fish and liquid seaweed and some other probiotics to get the crop off to a good start. And I really believe that helps us raise a good crop, and I think it is part of the reason that North Dakota State study showed that our potatoes were doing good. If you give a good, rhizosphere around the seed where the tubers are developing, that's all important in terms of quality and vigor and next generation in terms of yield.
So the tuber unit planting that you do, does that have any advantages to your average potato grower, or is that really only useful in a seed production setting?
I would say that given the effort, it's mainly the advantage for seed growers. But I'll tell you this: if you've got a pick-style planter and you've got the sprouts that have developed through green sprouting, they could, that pick-style planter is pretty rough on things, and it could chew up those sprouts. So in our system, I'm really glad to have this tuber unit planter designed, because it's very, the seed hopper is very gentle on the sprouts, and our way of handling it is gentle. So those sprouts, 99% of the sprouts that we've grown on them are on those seed pieces as they go into the ground. So that would be the one thing. If you're going to do this green sprouting, the first year you do it, maybe start out easy and see if it's going to fit. If you've got a mechanical pick style planter, just make sure that you're not chewing up the sprouts. So that would be the only advantage that I could maybe see. And there are other types of planters. There's cup planters, I think maybe are more prominent in the West. Just make sure that you're not damaging the sprouts that you've gone to such an effort to develop.
So, Jim, with that, we're going to stop here, take a break, get a word from our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. I want to talk to you a little bit more about what to do once you actually get the potatoes in the ground.
The Farmer to Farmer podcast is made possible with the generous support of Vermont Compost Company, makers of living potting soils for organic growers since 1992. In the transplant greenhouse, all of your investment in plant material, heat, labor, and overhead depend absolutely on the performance of the media where you expect your plants to grow. And that media has a really hard job to do: produce a healthy plant in just a few cubic centimeters of soil. When I started farming, I focused on getting the cheapest ingredients I could to make my own potting soil, and later on finding cheap potting soil already put together. But I found out what so many farmers have, that saving money on inputs doesn't always result in increased profits. Jennifer at Vermont Compost can tell story after story of customers who switched to less expensive options, but who have come back to Vermont Compost for the consistency and the quality of their potting soils. And even though it's not all about saving money, Vermont Compost Fall Pre-Buy program can help you get what your plants need at the best price with the best shipping options. Don't miss out. Vermont Compost Fall Pre-Buy program runs September 21st to December 21st. Taking care of growers by taking care of transplants since 1992. VermontCompost.com. This week, the Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by you, our listeners. And the nice thing about that is that I don't need to go on and on about it, because the fact that you're here probably means that you already think that the Farmer to Farmer podcast is kind of cool. We'd love to have your support. One of the easiest ways is to use the link at farmertofarmerpodcast.com/Amazon to do your shopping on Amazon.com. It doesn't cost you a penny more, and Amazon kicks a percentage of what you spend back to the show. You can also become a patron of the show by setting up a monthly donation to provide ongoing support for the behind-the-scenes efforts that you don't hear about, but which make the show what it is. Plus, we've got a couple of cool gifts for you if you go this route. We also have an option to do a one-time donation at farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate. Or just keep listening, commenting, sharing, and reviewing. It's awesome that you're here, and I'm grateful for your participation in the podcast. Go to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate for more information and all of the relevant links. Thank you so much for your support.
All right, and we're back with Jim Gerritsen from Wood Prairie Family Farm in Bridgewater, Maine. So, Jim, before we went on break, we were talking about getting the seeds in the ground. Now, if I'm planting potatoes without a potato planter, do I want to be putting those into a trench? Do I want to be setting them on top of the soil and building up a hill over them? What's the best way to actually plant those potatoes?
Well, I think the recommendations that we give to our customers is to the planting depth is more a function of latitude. And the reason is this: if you're down south, well, let me back up. Potatoes are a cool season crop. They do not like hot weather. So the way you get around that is if you're in the south, you plant an early spring crop before, and then get the tubers to size up before you get, the hot weather coming on. And by hot weather, I mean, potatoes really like it below 90, and that if you start to get steady temperatures above 90, especially above 95 degrees, the potatoes can actually keel over and die. So if you're down south, one way that you should do that is to probably look at planting early and mid-season varieties. And in our catalog and in many catalogs, they group potatoes by the length of season. I would probably, starting out, avoid late season varieties, except as an experiment to see if they might fit in your conditions. But if you're down south, I would recommend planting probably 3 to 4 inches deep. And that means the tubers that are going to be setting are going to be deep in the soil, and that's going to be helping give a little bit of insulation against that hot summer heat that you're going to be getting towards the harvest end. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, up here in Maine, in the northern tier states, where we're trying to get early spring planted potatoes, we're struggling to get adequate soil temperature. So we like to plant shallow. And in our case, we plant about an inch deep. And if you think about it, the soil temperature an inch down is going to be a lot warmer in the spring than it is 4 inches down. And then at harvest time, you're not going to have to go through as much effort to dig them up. But the caveat for that is if you plant them that shallow, you have to do an extra good job filling dirt up on them to prevent the shoulders of the developing tubers from being exposed to the sunlight, where they would turn green and thereby unmarketable. So the planting depth, the way our planter puts it down is we lay down the organic fertilizer with the fertilizer box, and that lays down a double line of fertilizer 2 inches below and 2 inches outside of the where the seed piece is planted. So if I didn't have a planter, what I would do is with a cotton hoe, I would make a trench maybe 4 inches deep, say if you were in the north or down to the mid-Atlantic, and then I'd sprinkle in the organic fertilizer that was going to go into the hole, and then I would use the hoe to knock about an inch of dirt on top of that fertilizer, and then I'd plant the seed piece on that, and then I'd cover up the hole and let it grow from there.
What are you doing for weed control once those potatoes are in the ground?
Okay, we've got a whole series of steps that we've refined over the years. So and here's one interesting thing. Our farm is about 600-foot elevation. We're about 200 foot higher than all the other farms in town. We're right on the edge of the North Maine woods, and the elevation goes up a little bit. We're always the last farm in town to lose snow. We're the last guys in town to get on the ground. Just, it's about 10 days. You lose your snow at the end of April, and you're on the ground by the 5th or 10th of May. By the time the snow does leave, the sun is high enough in the sky that our mud season is about 10 days long. I know in the Midwest you guys can have, a 2-month mud season, but ours,
yes.
Our winter is long, and that means a short mud season. But typically, we'll be at least 5 days behind everybody else planting potatoes, maybe even a week behind. But with these green sprouted potatoes, in a normal year, we have the first emergence of any potatoes in the town of Bridgewater. And what we do, we've got a potato flamer, propane flamer, where the tank is on the back of the tractor, and we've got 8 burners on the front that give us a curtain of about 6 or 6.5 feet wide. And at 10% emergence, we go out and do flaming. And we got into this habit 20 or 25 years ago of flaming to try to kill overwintering Colorado potato beetles that were starting to emerge and be on the plants and eat them at emergence. And, you know, for every female loaded with eggs, a female could lay 400 eggs, and if you could flame them, and all you got to do to kill them is burn off one of their antennae, and that's enough for a lethal kill. Problem is, in the last 20 years, the potato bugs are now emerging about a month later than they used to, and I believe, and I've talked to some entomologists from the Midwest who, because they were scientists, they wouldn't put this in solid terms, but I think they agreed with me. I think the the neonicotinoid insecticide, systemic insecticide Admire that came in the mid-1990s has been incredibly effective, especially at wiping out early emerging Colorado potato beetles. So we're not seeing them now for a month after. By the time they emerge, the plants are 10 or 12 inches high, and we would do too much damage to control the potato bugs that way. But what we learned was when we were controlling for Colorado potato beetles, we were getting excellent in-row weed control. So we've never gotten out of that habit. But what we like to do is at 10% emergence, we flame. Typically, those are going to be the king sprouts anyway, and we're not fans of king sprouts on this farm. So we'll burn them back, and, you know, I figure that's no drawback. So it does a little bit of damage, but it kills everything weed-wise that's going to be growing in-row and between-row. It's the in-row weeds that are the hardest to control. Then 7 days after that, we come in with a mid-mount cultivator. We've got 3 teeth. So we've got a 2-row system. We've got a 2-row planter. We cultivate and hoe with a 2-row system. So we've got a mid-mount cultivator, and these are simply teeth off of either an International Harvester field cultivator or a Brillion field cultivator. And this is not any system that we invented. This is an Aroostook County potato system that we've been using for 30 years, and, you know, probably, I don't know, when they invented this, it's probably been, 40 or 50 years, but it's a system that works very well. So mid-mount, we've got 3 field cultivator teeth, and the feet on them are what are called calves' tongues. And these, when they're new, they're thick metal, 3 inches wide, 11 inches long, and it comes to a point. And they really shovel the dirt up. And it's very common in potato country, and they do, if you look at them, they have the shape and dimensions of a calf, the tongue of a calf, or a small cow. So we put that on. We have them 3 abreast, and then on the rear mount toolbar, or on the rear mount 3-point hitch, we have a finger weeder, which basically we've got a 1953 version of a 4-row finger weeder. And it's about like a Lely or a Kovar, if you've got Kovar or Kovaz. We've got one of those, too, that we use for grain.
Right.
Anyway, same thing. It's a finger weeder. And as we're going down the row, we're burying the potatoes with the mid-mount, and then the finger weeder is scratching down the hill going right in row. And potatoes, once they emerge, they are anchored very well. And so if the first week we flamed at 10% emergence, by the time we're doing the finger weeder, we're probably up to about 60% emergence, something like that, and we're not pulling out. So even the potatoes that haven't emerged, they're not getting ripped out of the ground. So then we wait another week, and then we park the finger weeder for the year. We don't use that again. We used to finger weed twice, and now we think that we've refined it enough to where we can get good control between the flamer and the finger weeder by going through once. But then we attach hose, which they call them hose, but I think they're technically spades, and they kind of look like a middle buster plow. And the ones that we have, we've had for many years, and they used to be on every potato farm now, but as times change, they're no longer as easy to find. But they basically have flexible wings on them, and so you've got three teeth in three, that are surrounding two rows. So you've got three sets of teeth. The middle tooth, we back that up in the bracket that holds it to the toolbar. There's a bolt in there, and it allows you to back it up about 3.5 inches. So we back that up 3.5 inches, and then we put on the spade, and that allows some of the dirt to flow past those remaining two calves' tongues. So the calves' tongue loosen up the soil, and then the hoe throws it underneath the plant. And we typically do this hoeing and the cultivating in the evening, especially the hoeing in the evening, because during the day, if you got hot weather, the plants are kind of drooping down. And then once the sun weakens in the sky, the plants start to pick up, the nighttime moisture, and they get more erect. So you can throw the dirt underneath the plant without burying the leaves. And we're not fanatical about it, but after we're done finger weeding, we don't want to bury any leaves anymore. We're trying to throw the dirt under the plant, and what we're trying to achieve is a peaked hill. Some people like a flat hill that's maybe 3 or 4 inches across. What we strive for is a peaked hill, so that, if you do get heavy rain and you've got blight pressure, you're more likely to shed that water down to the row middle rather than infiltrate. If you got a flat top hill, you've got rain that's going to potentially, theoretically, wash blight spores into the hill, and you can get tuber contamination of blight spores. So that's our design, is we like a peaked hill. So we do cultivating once, and then we hoe twice. And the last time I hoe, which is about a week or 10 days after the first time I hoe, is maybe 3 to 5 days before we get row closure. And row closure is when the potato plants from one row touch the plants on the other row. So by doing it that close prior to row closure, we're getting absolute weed control. There's no light getting in underneath there. And our weed control is probably, in a normal year, not that anything is normal anymore, and we are getting rain that is preventing us from getting in the field in a timely manner, as I assume most of the people in the East are running into at least some of the years. But we can get, probably 99.9% weed control in a normal year. In a normal year, we don't have to do any hand weeding. We can do it just by machine.
It sounds like between the calves' tongues and the hose that you're using, that you're not actually using any hilling discs.
No, that was never very popular here, and I haven't seen any for 30 years. But they had some what are truly hose that I'm not sure I can describe them. They're slightly inclined metal, but you really had to know what you were doing to get them adjusted. And what the old-timers taught me is that the hose would make the very highest quality hill, but since virtually nobody knew how to adjust them perfectly, you never got a really great hill. So I think that's why they went out of favor. And these, I call them spades. The practice up here is called hoeing. I think going back to, probably back when you had horse hoes. But it's really a spade, which looks like a middle buster plow. And by doing that, you can get a very high quality hill, and it's very, it's very universal. Anybody can do it. It's not hard to achieve. So that's what we've done, and that's what we recommend to our customers.
So then, of course, the next step is to get in there and harvest the potatoes. How do you decide when the potatoes are ready to harvest? I know for a lot of growers, people are getting dieback on the vines well before frost. Is that happening in your varieties?
Well, we kill them when we want them dead. The fact is, first off, as soon as you see blossoms out there on plants, you're going to have tubers that you could start to be harvesting. It's not that a potato needs to blossom. They are being vegetatively propagated, so the blossoms are there. God put them there for us to enjoy. But it does give you an indication that that's when the tubers they've already set and they're starting to develop. So in our case, we sell very little amount of potatoes roadside, so we really want to do the harvest once and for all in the fall. So what we do is we kill the plants with our propane flamer again. At the time, what we're trying to get is, like any farmer, we want to get a good yield, but we're not chiefly concerned about yield. So we kill the plants in their juvenile stage when the tubers are full of youthful vigor and have not fully sized up like you would for a processed potato or a table stock potato. And because we kill them at that stage, that maintains more vigor in them. So again, that vigor is directly translatable to higher yield in the next generation. So we start to go out. We count the number of days since we planted. We develop a chart every year based on what was the planting day. And then we keep weather records. So we're, did we have drought stress to where, the crop is a little bit late because they weren't getting the water when they needed or something like that. So we'll add or subtract days based on a historical record. So we more or less know how many days it takes of Maine growing days to kill a different variety. And then because we plant our late varieties first, our early varieties second, then we start killing and harvesting our early varieties first and our late varieties last. So, year in, year out, we grow about the same varieties. So we have about the same planting order and about the same killing order. So we know of the 24 varieties that we've got, we know which 3 or 4 varieties we need to be paying attention to first. And usually Reddale is the first variety that we kill. And we know it has let me tell you my philosophy about potatoes. If you can't find 2 serious problems with a potato variety, you're not looking at it hard enough. Every variety has something wrong with it. So your job as a farmer is to decide what qualities does this excel in and what negative qualities can I live with. So in the case of Reddale, as I think I said earlier, it tends to set not the highest number of tubers, maybe 4 tubers per hill if it wanted to, and the organic trigger that we spray on during the green sprouting process has improved that to some years we'll get 7, maybe even 8, so it really is a help. But what we'll do is dig in the rows of the Reddale, and when we find the first tuber that has hit 3 inches, we know that's time to kill. Because if there's sufficient water in the soil at that time, it'll take about 5 days for that plant to die in our flaming process, and that 3-inch tuber will go to 3.5-inch tuber in 5 days, and it's more likely than not to have hollow heart. So with Reddale, that's a variety that we like to cram in the row. We plant them 6.7-inch apart, 3,000 pounds of seed per acre with the trigger. And in that way, by killing them and not letting them go, they can quickly go to oversize with lunkers. So we're very cautious about that. So then we know, okay, then after Reddale is probably going to be, we've got this sequence. It'll be Caribe as the next variety, which is not nearly as susceptible to hollow heart. And then some years, Red Cloud is a funny variety, and some years it may size up almost as quickly as the Reddale. So we've learned that we've got to keep an eye on that keep an eye on Yukon Gold and Onaway, these early varieties. So we kind of have a historical record, and we know which suspects to be checking first. But we're in the hill on a regular basis, digging and seeing how the tubers are coming and killing them at the appropriate time. So our killing process, we're using that same propane flamer, and it takes generally 2 passes to do the kill. We go in first, and that's just to try to wilt the plant. So we're going through relatively fast, maybe 2.5 or 3 miles an hour over the canopy, and we've got these flamers, and it sounds like a freight train coming, and it basically wilts the plant. It does not burn them to smithereens. You could do that, but I don't think you could afford to do that for the propane usage. But we go through the field and flame them that way, and then we wait for 24 to 48 hours, hope that maybe we get some nice drying weather, and then we go in for a second pass, and in that case, we slow down the tractor so that we're going probably about 1.5 miles per hour. And this is all, it's a liquid propane system, and we're operating at 30 pounds of tank pressure. And we go through, and we basically, at that speed, you end up burning off virtually all of the leaf area, which by now have dried to where they burn off pretty readily. And then, for the most part, all that you're left behind is a green stem, that's maybe 2.5 feet tall, and within a week that'll keel over, and then it will desiccate and dry out, so that by the time you're ready to harvest, you can harvest any time after you go out and check that lone remaining stem, and there will be absolutely no green matter left in it. It will be dried. There won't be any, it will be dried and brittle. It won't have any green in it or any moisture in it. At that time, that correlates with having developed a nice skin on the tuber, and it will be ready to harvest. So that process is I like to do it in 3 weeks. The later you get into the fall, as the temperature drops, that could increase the amount of time, and that's assuming that you have adequate moisture, because that process is a biological process, and in fact, the tuber is losing moisture from its skin, but it does take some moisture in the soil in order for that process to occur. But the best way to do it in my book is to figure on about 3 weeks. And there are, what you don't want to do is to be, the phrase up here is up against green potatoes, to where the potatoes aren't green, but the tops are still green, and you're beating them up, running them over the harvester, because they haven't had enough time to get healed up, and they start to feather out and they look horrible.
So then the harvest process, you're using a pretty standard potato harvester to get these out of the ground?
Well, we, up until 9 years ago, we dug the old-fashioned way, digging with a 2-row John Deere digger, and then we would have kids pick those potatoes and put them first into barrels, and we switched to pallet boxes in 1999. So Aroostook County is one of the last places in the United States where they closed the schools down for potato harvest break, and they've been doing this since World War II. And so the beauty of this is our kids have never missed a potato harvest. So anyway, as the years go by, and as farms have gotten larger and larger, and the smaller farms that would harvest by hand have disappeared, we became concerned that they would at some point abandon the potato harvest break. And I've got friends that have been in towns where they decided in June, after they had planted their crop in May, they decided in June there would be no potato harvest break that same fall. And that farmer had to scurry and get a harvester together because he'd been a hand operation. So we decided that the time was upon us to switch over, and we imported the first Yuko potato harvester from Finland, in the first one into North America. And Yuko is spelled Juko, and I think it's still online, but if you go, they've got a 10-minute video. It's called the Yuko Super MIDI, and they've got a couple of guys with red jumpsuits on from the factory with Yuko printed across their backs, and they're showing it's a sales film, but it's interesting to watch, and it's really a well-made harvester. It's somewhat common on the organic farms in Europe, and when we decided that we wanted to switch over, again, because we have a European-like intensive operation, we decided that we would go for a European style rather than the extensive ones that are plentiful here in Maine.
And so into the pallet bins and then into the storage, which we talked about earlier, actually, when we were talking about that physiologically aging of the potatoes and how important it was to get them cooled down as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so it's not complicated. The beauty of this harvester is the potatoes are dug up. They go up a primary bed that drops most of the dirt, and then you've got left, at least here in Maine, you've got potatoes and rocks. And then there is a separation mechanism that works really well, but you've still got maybe 10% of the potatoes and rocks being in the wrong side on the inspection table. So you've got 4 workers on back, and you've got rocks going down one side into a rock hopper, and then you've got potatoes going down the other side directly into the pallet box in which they're going to be stored in. So the workers on back will toss out an occasional rotten potato, and then they'll toss the rocks from the potato side of the conveyor to the opposite side, and the potatoes that are on their way to the rock dump, they'll toss them over so that they end up into the potato box. So it's our boxes are 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot, and they hold about 2,000 pounds of potatoes. And last year was the best year we had. I would say in at least 10 years. Some guys were saying it was the best year in 30 years. And I was working every morning trying to repair pallet boxes because we had run out of pallet boxes. And farmers actually abandoned harvesting some, 10, 20 acres apiece last fall because they ran out of places to store the potatoes. It was that kind of harvest, yeah.
So having walked us through the entire season of a potato, thank you, Jim. This was fantastic. I want to turn here and go to our lightning round. So what's your favorite tool on the farm?
Well, if it was a mechanical tool, it would probably be that propane flamer. We use it on potatoes. We use it for stale bed carrots, 6 days after planting carrots, table carrots. We flame the bed, and that takes out the weeds. So that is a tool I would hate to have to farm without. And if it was a hand tool, I would say it would be a stirrup hoe that we wear them out pretty regularly growing the crops like, beets and carrots and parsnips and onions that we grow. And
I always ask everybody, what's your favorite crop to grow? But I think I probably know the answer to that.
I think you know the answer. We're really into potatoes. And, I think that's one of the things you really need to love the crop that you're focused on. And, this area that we're in, it is a real potato-centric culture to the extent, and to this day, if you get a nice day in September and early October, you wouldn't say in Aroostook County, gee, this is a nice day. The expression, and it's not forced, it's just natural, is, this is a good day to dig. And everybody up here has worked on potato farms, back in the old days, and up until the 60s when the first harvesters came in, everybody was picking by hand. So, back 40 years ago, my first potato harvest, our town of Bridgewater has a population of 600 people. And back then we had 30 farms in town that probably had an average of 15 people working on a crew. So you look at that, and that's 450 people that are working at potato harvest in one town where the population is only 600. So everybody was part of this potato culture, and it's changed now. Potatoes is a crop that has lent itself towards mechanization and consolidation and kind of industrialization, but it was a really exciting time up here in days gone by where, 40 years ago we had 1,200 potato farmers in Aroostook County, and we're now down to 100. So times have changed. The trucks are immense. It's amazing. Some of these trucks are driven on farm fields, but, they're tractor trailer size. But, it is a crop that can go towards industrialization, and with all of the socioeconomic issues around farming nowadays, they've gone that direction. And it's just kind of sad that, our town, we're now down to about 5 potato farmers in town. And there used to be many, and, some towns now just have 1 or 2 potato farmers left in them. It's just a different day than it used to be.
Do you have a favorite book about potatoes?
Well, I've been thinking I was going to write one for years, and being a farmer, I don't get around to doing a lot of things that I'd like to do. And then one came out from my friend Walter D. Young, the potato breeder at Cornell, and his dad, Henke D. Young, the potato breeder at Fredericton, New Brunswick. And it's a really good book. So they've kind of taken the pressure off. I think since their book is written, I probably don't need to write one now. But I think it's called The Complete Book of Potatoes. And I've teased Walter. I said, now is your boy going to go into potato breeding, so that this is going to be kind of a 3-generation dynasty, and time will tell, I guess. But Walter is a great guy, and his father, Hilke, which he's Dutch, and he goes by Henry to most people. But he was the breeder of Caribe, which is one of our favorite varieties. And he's such a nice man, and I saw him at an organic conference in the Maritimes. First met him maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and was quick to go up to him and said, of all the varieties we grow, that Caribe is one of my favorites, and it's one of our best-selling varieties. And this big smile came across his face. These potato breeders live a very long and lonely life. If they go through 100,000 crosses and get one good variety out of that, they're a good breeder. And sometimes good varieties fall by the wayside. And anyway, Hilke was really genuinely pleased to hear that there was a following for this variety, and it's a great variety. It's the one variety that we've listed in our catalog for 25 or 30 years now, and we say this variety should be grown in every garden, and it's that valuable a variety. It's so early, it's got so many things going for it, and it was made that much more special because I know the potato breeder who brought it into this world.
It is really a fantastic variety. It's one of those that just that iridescent purple skin and then that bright white flesh. I think it's just, even without the eating quality, the thing is a work of art.
Oh, it's beautiful, and every potato farmer I know is like a little kid in the fall, and as you're driving the harvester and those potatoes boil up out of the hill that the harvester is digging, it's a moving experience for anyone. But my neighbors are raising round whites and russets to dig up a hill of Caribe. It is so beautiful, that lustrous purple skin. It's hard to describe. It is just so beautiful. I love it. And we've got people that are round white eaters that have come down every year to get Caribe from us because they love the taste and the texture. And for a round white Aroostook County person to eat a purple potato, it's got to be a good potato.
That's right. And finally, if you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, Jim, what would it be?
Oh, jeepers. In hindsight, seemed like we tried so many different crops, tried to figure out what can we make a living at, and went down so many false paths and trying to down different rabbit holes. And I wish I could have avoided that and focused on it. And I think now maybe younger, we were inventing everything back then. Nobody knew how to do this stuff. So I think that was a necessary process, but I think of how much time and effort we went down channels that really weren't going to work, but we didn't know it at the time, and there was no one to tell us that. But I wish that I'd have been able to spare myself that. But, the thought of growing potatoes and making a living from selling them, it took us 20 years to figure out how to do that. And now, well, I guess, 15 years anyway. And I wish we could have figured that out sooner, but I think that's just part of the process is you've got to cut your own teeth. And so I guess maybe is now that there's this tremendous wealth of experience out, there are probably hundreds of thousands of years of organic farming experience for young people to draw on that 40 and 50 years ago did not exist. So ask a lot of questions, become friends with older farmers and, let them mentor you because you'll save a lot of, misery. And in my case, though he was not an organic farmer, I had one neighbor that was a great guy. His nickname was Doss, so Doss Morse, and he was born in 1899. And he was what I think an anthropologist would call a subsistence farmer. He grew potatoes. He had cows, had horses, had pigs. They'd churn separate the cream, and they'd make butter, and they'd sell the butter at the store to help pay taxes, and they'd feed the skim milk to the hogs, and they'd raise cobbler potatoes and Jacob's cattle dry beans. So when I started in, I raised cobbler potatoes and Jacob's cattle dry beans, 35, 40 years ago, and learned a lot from him. So I guess he was my source, but, he was a skeptic to the ideas of organic farming, and I would hear this expression, that's not the way we do things in Aroostook County. And my respect for him, I wasn't going to argue with him. He'd done this his whole life, and I had some new ideas and didn't have experience to back it up. But anyway, I learned from him and ended up, he was a wise man. He'd gone to school through the 8th grade, but he had knowledge of how to do virtually everything I ever asked him. He either had done it himself or he knew how somebody had done it. So I think in, our ideas on, what wisdom is, he had all the wisdom in the world, and it was great to have that. And I think in the trade was to see a young person, when I came in the 70s, everyone was leaving the farm, and that what he and his wife, Etta, they were married for 67 years, what they did wasn't really appreciated, and that's kind of how it was communicated. So for a young fellow to be interested in learning about all this, I think that was good for them too. So we had a number of good years together before Etta passed on, and then Doss moved on into the nursing home. But anyway, search out people that have done it, because they'll share with you, and organic farming is the best life possible, but it's also probably about the most difficult life. It's a challenge. We're in the age of cheap food, and the government still has animosity towards organic, so it's not an easy way to go. So you do need to use your community to support yourself. So, focus on that and use some of the benefit of people that have gone before you.
Thank you, Jim. Before we go, if people are looking for more information about where to get your seed potatoes, where would they go, and what's the right time of year to be placing your order?
Well, we ship potatoes 10 months out of the year, so we're going to start shipping in August, but we take orders anytime. The easiest thing is we do have a mail order catalog, a free catalog, so you can access everything by going to our website, www.woodprairie.com, and we've got a transactional website, so you can place an order on the website. You can call us on the phone, place an order. You can mail in an order, fax in an order, however you want to place it with us. We're happy to get it. But I do recommend that you place an order in the fall before January, because some of the varieties that we grow do start to sell out early on. So if you order in the fall, you can basically get anything that you want. If you wait until after the first of the year, you may have to listen to substitutions that we're offering for sold-out varieties.
Jim, thank you so much for this wealth of information about potatoes. I love it.
Well, I love talking about potatoes, so I'm happy to talk potatoes with anyone, especially you, Chris.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay.
All right, so wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this is episode 83 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast, and you can find the notes for the show, including instructions for green sprouting and building green sprouting trays at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or just searching for Gerritsen. That's Gerritsen. Don't forget, you can support the show by going to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate. Whether you're donating to the show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate, shopping at Amazon through the link at farmertofarmerpodcast.com/Amazon, or showing us your love by leaving us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, your support matters. Thank you. If you enjoy the podcast, I'll bet you'd enjoy being on my email list, The Flying Rutabaga. You can check that out at farmertofarmerpodcast.com or purplepitchfork.com. Thank you for listening. Be safe out there and keep the tractor running.